Chapter 15, Saved by the Devil. My heart was pounding in my chest as I peered around the club and got lost in the ocean of greedy, lascivious faces. It was even more disorienting with the way that everyone was hiding behind a different mask, concealing their identity from me. It was then that I realized who was behind the skeleton mask. It was the fallen angel himself, Ellis Peterson. A sudden feeling of relief fell over me, as my heart sped up and I began to pray that he would win me. The rest of the tables were all taken downstairs, but upstairs, it felt like a private dining room for Ellis and myself, and I'm thinking with Ellis' influence, that was intentional. I hope that Jesse behaved when he was speaking with you. Ellis placed his napkin on his lap, as I did the same. He did, he's very nice. I smiled. Ellis and I continued to share small talk until our food was served. Are you familiar with wine, Miss Richardson? I shook my head. Not much. A soft laugh left his lips, as he poured himself another glass of wine. This is a 2018 Zinfandel. It comes from Croatia, just on the other side of the Adriatic. He lifted his glass of wine and swirled it. If you're looking for a good wine from Italy, then a 2017 or 2019 Primitivo is what you're looking for. It's a close relative to a Zin and is similar. It's big and fruity with a good body and a nice peppery finish, easy to like and my go-to for new wine drinkers. And what makes those years so special? I stared at him with a curious expression. Years are what we call the vintage, when the grape grew and was harvested, and is a bigger deal in some regions. In California, because the weather is more even, the vintage is less important, but there are still good, bad, and average years. Ellis took a sip of the wine and hummed, it depends on the region, grape, winemaker, and so on. So, older isn't necessarily better. I followed up, older is always most certainly better. Ellis winked, then continued, but not all wine is meant to be aged. He must have taken my surprised reaction by his comment to mean I was still confused, so he clarified, wine changes flavor as it ages and tastes less fruity and exuberant, so to speak. His expression shifted to something darker, and he lowered his voice. It gains more leathery and savory notes. Gets more subtle. I swallowed hard as my heart sped up from his words and a blush ran from my face to my chest at the mention of leather. I cleared my throat and brought my glass of water to my lips, downing it. Ellis relaxed against the back of his chair with a shrug, tracing the rim of his wine glass, which that can be wonderful, but it would definitely be lost to a novice drinker. He flashed a glance up at me with a soft smirk, locking his eyes with mine. I see, I nodded, and for the first time ever I was curious about the liquid that I was taught to stay away from. Not interested in tasting it? Ellis moved his gaze towards my full glass that Jesse had poured earlier. He looked different tonight, mysterious, dangerous, yet comforting. I licked my lips, surprised that I wanted to run off the stage and leap into his arms to thank him for saving me, but then I heard the other man scoff and step up to raise his hand. The burgundy liquid sat quietly and gracefully in the glass. I didn't know why I thought of the word gracefully, but I just got this feeling that the beautiful liquor shouldn't be something that intimidating. Maybe neither was the person who knew so much about it. I brought the glass of Zinfandel to my lips and took a few sips, finding it mildly enjoyable. He softly laughed at my expression as I wrinkled my nose at the flavor. It'll grow on you, Ellis said with a slight smirk. You probably would find a rose or white wine to be easier to drink and more agreeable. I wasn't so sure about that, but I continued the conversation. I didn't know you knew so much about wines. I picked up the glass of Zinfandel, staring at it with curiosity. I bought an estate in Italy and it happened to come with a vineyard. Ever since then, wine was more than just a guilty pleasure, more of a passion. The conversation became more grounded. Wait until the food comes. The wine takes on a whole new flavor, he assured me, a plain expression on his face. Jesse returned with our food, 2 delicately plated servings of steak au poivre and haricots verts. Enjoy, Jesse said calmly and then left Ellis and I again. Ellis waited for me to begin eating and then he followed suit. The steak was tender and cooked to perfection, still steaming on the plate. I took a sip of the wine after trying the steak and my whole perception of the Zinfandel changed. It was much more subtly sweet, and flowed down my throat easily with the aftertaste of the steak. See? Ellis flashed a grin after seeing my reaction to the wine again. I set my glass down, as I thought about how weird it was that I was dining with Carl's dad after Carl and I had already broken up. Carl never took me out to a dinner like this. I didn't mean Carl never took me out for a fancy dinner. But this was different. The restaurant, and the feeling I had around Ellis, who held himself so dignified, was different. Red Sea wasn't one of those most expensive restaurants. However, every little detail here showed that its owner poured his heart and passion into this place, and the food tasted better because of that. And Ellis. I was surprised at how easy it was to carry an interesting conversation with him. I realized how humorous and interesting he could be while he wasn't intentionally trying to make me upset. All in all, he made pleasant company for dinner. 350, and oh, I didn't want that man to be the highest bidder and do whatever he wanted with me. My gaze flew over to Ellis and clung to him for dear life. 400. Ellis raised his hand from his pocket, keeping his gaze on me. Doesn't surprise me. Ellis brushed his son away like he didn't want to talk about him. Your relationship is complicated, isn't it? I followed up. Ellis drank the rest of his wine before pouring himself more. Carl was dropped off at my doorstep when he was already 16. It's hard to develop trust, or even a connection, after that many years apart. Time is distance, I remarked. It's hard to overcome that gap. It takes two to mend any broken bond, Ellis wisely added. He was talking about himself and Carl, but I couldn't help thinking about my relationship with Carl. I want to be upset with him, but a part of my heart still belongs to him. Carl was my first love, and first loves were hard to forget. Ellis ran his finger along the stem of his wine glass and peered at me with a warm expression. Give it some time, you'll be fine. After spending a pleasant dinner talking with Ellis, I realized his intentions weren't selfish, or even harmful. It seemed like he was actually trying to protect me, and I knew by the concerned look in his eyes that maybe I should heed his advice. Chapter 18, What Drives Me? Ellis drove me home, and I was pleasantly surprised how the evening turned out to be given where it had started. A small part of me felt like he wasn't the cold man I once thought, but I wasn't ready to investigate deeper. It was late and I had to get home. I blushed, thinking maybe I had a bit too much wine, and looked out the side window as we drew closer to my house. Suddenly, I heard Ellis release a sound as if he had noticed something unusual, and then I turned my attention to the front window. Carl's BMW was parked down the street. A woman opened the passenger door and stepped out, and my heart dropped to the floor. It was my sister, Bethany. Carl suddenly burst from the driver's seat and began chasing her around the car teasingly. From the smiles on their faces, I could tell they were having a good time. Carl suddenly raced back around the car and caught the unsuspecting Bethany in his arms. He pinned her against the side of the car and ran his hand along her cheek, sinking his fingers into her hair before capturing my sister's lips in a passionate kiss. His hand ran down Bethany's arm to her wrist before intertwining his fingers with hers. The way he was holding hands with my sister and kissing her shocked me and made me think this wasn't the first time based on the intensity. I was lost in the spectacle before me and I wondered if this was really happening or not. 425. The other man raised his glass. The bartering went back and forth between the two men until Ellis growled and raised it. 1 million. My lips parted and the crowd erupted into gasps at the price that he had put out. This all had to be a bad dream, one that I couldn't pull myself out of. Carl led Bethany into the back seat, and I spiraled further and deeper into sadness and disbelief. The car began to shake as if it had come alive, and as much as I tried to deny it, I knew what was happening. My eyes widened and I couldn't make a sound. I felt my entire body trembling, not sure whether that was due to sadness or anger or both. I watched Carl's car bouncing even more severely and I had to force myself to look away. My fists clenched hard and wrinkled my dress, and I tried to control my fast breathing so that tears wouldn't fall. The two people who I loved and trusted with all my heart were mingling together. The bouncing car, and the vague shameless noises I heard, laughed at how naive I had been. I tried to persuade myself that maybe they got together right after I broke up with Carl, but that was just a helpless excuse that I made up to make myself look less pitiful. Tears burned my eyes as I came to the realization that our whole relationship was a lie. No, that he was a lie, and that didn't even begin to describe the utter betrayal I felt by my sister. I swallowed hard and the words escaped me. He really is cheating on me. Ellis stayed silent for a moment, before speaking. Then he gently covered my hand with his, and gave me a few squeezes, as if he was sending his strength to me. I didn't pull away from him as I really needed to. You must be laughing at me. I sniffed. I was so. SH. Don't be so harsh on yourself. Ellis' voice was calm and soothing. It's not your fault. I froze and looked up at him. He could have said I told you so and proved to me that he was right. Yet he said none of that. Instead, he simply held my hand, and sat there quietly with me, providing me the silent, yet most precious support that I needed at this moment. Finally, I couldn't control my tears anymore as they began falling from my eyes. "Why didn't you say, 'I told you so'?" "You could have." My gaze from behind my watery eyes met his, and all I saw was understanding and genuine concern for me. His voice was calm and consoling. "Why would I do that to a sweet girl like you? Do I look like that kind of monster?" His words made my tears fall even faster, and I whimpered, I thought he loved me, they loved me." Ellis carefully lifted my chin with his finger and gently wiped off my tears using his thumb. His touches were warm and tender, as if he was worried that he'd hurt me. The other man cursed beneath his breath and the auctioneer stumbled. "Anyone want to bid higher?" The auctioneer peered around the club, going once, going twice, going 3 times. No one even thought to raise a hand, causing the auctioneer to whack the podium with his cane. "Sold for $1 million to the devil in red." "Sorry, I'm being silly." I tried to force a smile on my face, but failed. He brushed the side of my chin with his thumb and leaned closer, letting his warm breath linger along my lips. "Look, for what it's worth, I'm sorry for what my son is and has done to you. You don't need to apologize." I dropped my gaze. "Olivia," he said, "look at me." I was stunned. This was the first time that he called my first name, and I was enraptured for a moment. His deep voice was dominating, yet I wasn't intimidated by him. Instead, it was as if he was there to support me and protect me. I couldn't deny that I loved how my name rolled off his tongue. My sobbing seemed to have stopped as his gaze locked on mine, as if he wanted to make me relax. He gave me a smile and patted my hands twice before letting go of them. "Let me let you in on a little secret of how I live my life," he smirked. I found myself willing to listen. "Don't waste time grieving over someone who is already dead to you." Ellis sighed and looked over at the bouncing car. "Because you need to focus on your own life ahead." His words echoed in my mind as he remarked, "It's helped me." I looked into his eyes to give him my attention. It was better than staring at the bouncing car and wondering what Carl was doing to my sister in there. "You're a beautiful woman who deserves so much more." Ellis searched my eyes. His dark eyes locked on me, and I lost myself in them for a moment. "Everything will be okay. You'll make it through this and rise up stronger than before." I shook my head and smiled bitterly. I don't even know what I deserve now. To be treated like a queen with respect and admiration. Ellis's expression was sincere when he said it. My heart skipped a beat. I blushed. "You're not just saying this to tease me, are you?" He softly laughed. "No, Miss Richardson, I'm being sincere with you. You may not be the smartest." I raised my eyebrow, causing him to laugh harder. "I'm kidding, Miss Richardson." For whatever reason, I thought of the girl who I ran into in his garden and smiled. "Do you say this to all the women you've been with?" "No wonder you seem to catch on quick." "But no, I don't say that to all of them." Ellis became serious and reassured. "I'm being honest with you." At that moment, a loud noise pierced through the air. I glanced outside. Carl's car was bouncing so hard that it seemed to set off the alarm. I grabbed the skirt of my dress and rushed towards the stairs to run down when 2 guards grabbed me by the forearms and told me to stop. I glared at them, but I knew I needed to listen to them if I didn't want myself to get hurt. I felt the blood fleeing from my face and my body was trembling again. When I looked at Ellis again, I noticed he was also staring at me. His brow was furrowed, and he cleared his throat, seeming like he was trying to say something to comfort me, I assumed. A rush of emotions took over me and I couldn't think straight. Before I knew it, I found myself peering down at his lips. I heard my pulse pounding in my eardrums, and it was even overpowering the noises from Carl's car. Maybe it was due to the wine I had earlier, or maybe I just wanted to show my appreciation for him. But at that moment, all I wanted to do was to kiss the man next to me. As I leaned closer to him, I could even feel the warm breath from his mouth. He was surprised, and his eyes narrowed. I knew this man symbolized all things that were dangerous, but oddly enough, I also felt safe. My heart was about to leap from my chest as I was only an inch away from him. I could feel the energy floating between our lips. However, suddenly, he pulled away. For a moment, my eyes were in a trance and I looked at him confused. He licked his lips and peered into my eyes, his mesmerizing dark pupils looking straight into mine. "I don't want you to kiss me just because you're hurt and you're looking for a rebound." My lips parted and I didn't know what to say. I was so overwhelmed by my emotions and perhaps by the alcohol. My mouth was dry and my heart was still thumping. "I don't want you to kiss me before you're just looking to get back at your ex." He shifted in his seat and peered at me with a soft expression. I want you to kiss me because you truly want me. My heart began to beat faster in my chest at his words and my face must have turned bright red. What did I just do? What did he stop me from doing? I was so embarrassed and just wanted to dig a hole and bury myself in it. Luckily, Ellis switched the topic right away and brushed my hair behind my ear. You've had quite an evening tonight. Now, let's take you home. Chapter 19. My turn to reach out to him, Olivia POV. As I turned the doorknob, hoping I could sneak in unnoticed, I was met with my parents' gaze focused right on the door. I quickly ran my hands through my hair and tried to make myself presentable. There you are, my father scolded as he was flipping through his newspaper. My mother added, we were so worried about you, and she hurried up to me to give me a hug. I told you I was getting a bite to eat, I reasoned, but it didn't register. I saw Ellie turned around and left the crowd, and I started to get nervous again. I wished I could leave with him right this moment, but I figured I'd be with him shortly. Come along, little one of the men chuckled. Time to get you all dressed up nice and pretty in some luxury gear. Have you heard from your sister? My mother questioned. The mere mention of Bethany sent a shiver down my spine. After what I'd witnessed, it was hard to believe she really was my sister anymore. I shook my head. We hadn't been able to reach her for hours, my mother remarked. I wonder why, I thought. I'm sure she's not far away. I muttered and began walking down the hallway away from the front door. My parents seemed to notice my unusual mood, but they didn't pry further. As I approached the staircase, I heard the front door open and I turned around. I'm home, Bethany started to announce when she froze mid-sentence as soon as her eyes locked onto mine. She seemed surprised to see me here. My mother ran up to her and gave her a hug while my father continued reading the newspaper. How was your business meeting, dear? My mother asked. Bethany cleared her throat a few times and straightened her back. I stayed to listen to hear how many lies that she could spew. Come, tell us all about it, my mother encouraged, motioning Bethany to take a seat at the table. It went really well. It should come out in Business Weekly by the end of the month, Bethany shared as she took her seat. Honey, make sure to keep an eye for it when you're reading, my mother mentioned to my father. Then, Bethany interjected, I'm sure it's just going to be a small little thing, really, you might even miss it. She sighed like she was nervous, like there was no interview at all. I turned around and approached the table, my tone overly cheery. We wouldn't miss it for anything. I should speak to Jarvis at Business Weekly then, my father declared, to get you on the cover of the magazine. He placed the newspaper down onto the table. Bethany's eyes widened and I noticed her nails clawing into her sides. Oh, Daddy, that won't be necessary. I want to try to work my way up without your connections, but I appreciate you and Mother so very much. Her words made me wince. My mother commended. That's so honorable of you, Bethy. Her sweet nickname made me feel sick. Isn't that right, Olivia? My mother added, extremely. I muttered with a fake smile. I realized my attitude was drawing attention to myself and so I excused myself. I'm sorry, I'm just a bit tired. I should be getting to bed. I left my parents to fawn over Bethany as I went up to my bedroom and locked it shut. There was so much on my mind that I had to process, between the betrayal of Bethany to the possible criminal plot she orchestrated with my kidnapping. You wouldn't want to keep your dom waiting, would you, my dom? I swallowed hard and chose to cooperate instead of fight. You're right, I'd hate to keep him waiting. I felt their grips loosen on my arms, as I chose to walk with them to a separate room with a vanity and an area to change clothes behind a silk screen. I plopped down onto my bed and allowed myself to be swallowed whole, wishing I could just disappear from my current reality. Hearing Bethany's voice downstairs, though, pulled me out of that thought and brought my mind back to her and Carl, upsetting me more. Everyone loved Bethany, my parents especially. It was hard to imagine she could truly be a different person than who she led on to be. And why, all of a sudden, was everything wrong in my life pointing back to her? My mind was unstable, and my heart even more so. I nudged my head underneath two pillows to drown out the noise downstairs and let my emotional exhaustion lay me to rest. The next day I woke feeling slightly refreshed, yet still far from relieved. It was wrong of me to jump to conclusions that Bethany would have had me kidnapped. I knew my assumptions stemmed from my anger seeing her and Carl making love in the back of his car. We had just broken up, and it wasn't right of me to link the two events, one being criminal and the other being emotional. Even I had made the rash decision to try and kiss Ellis as revenge, so I didn't want to use love and passion as a reason to be suspicious. The only thing that would bring me some peace is finding out the truth about who ordered my kidnapping, although I really had no idea where to start. But then Ellis came to my mind. He had connections with the luxury dungeon. but he also seemed to suspect Bethany, and it was possible that he could give me some answer. I opened my phone and thought about texting Ellis. He had messaged me once before, but of course I blocked his number immediately since I was in no mood at the time to forgive him following that distasteful evening in my bed. But now, after what he told me in the car, I realized that he was a different man than I thought. I tapped the unblock button and a slew of unread messages from Ellis sent through. The first one read, "Hi Olivia, it's Ellis. I suppose you're having a tough time. I don't think it's good to dwell on what happened. Tomorrow is a new day. I'm happy to talk." Simple, but effective words. He was happy to talk, but I wasn't sure I was yet. Also, what else was there to talk about regarding what we saw last night? Talking wouldn't heal that wound. I scrolled up towards the previous message. It read, $1 million. Wow, a lot of money just for a dinner, but with you, having that moment was priceless lol. I really doubted Ellis was laughing that loudly. A rack of various lingerie made from different materials from lace to leather stood off to the side in various shades of colors. I glanced through them, wondering what they each were. A wall of masks was set up behind the clothing from average masquerade ones to animals. What was even funny about that, other than the corny pickup line? I should have known that Ellis would have continued his teasing of me, even digitally. I heard there's a piano concerto happening tonight. I wondered if you were going. I won't be able to make it. I have other plans, such as attending auctions at a luxury dungeon. Funny he left that part out. It made me think, though, he sent this message right before the kidnapping. He didn't have anything to do with what happened, right? Was it just a coincidence that he was at the very same auction? It seemed unlikely, though, that he would have orchestrated a kidnapping just to pay $1 million so he could get me back. Then, finally I reached the last message in my inbox. Ellis' original message was still sitting there, the one I hadn't read when I blocked his number so quickly that night outside of the concert hall. "I'm so sorry for what happened last night, Miss Richardson. I was under the influence and really ket up. I had no intention of making you uncomfortable in any way, but intentional or not, I was wrong. Let me make it up to you, the Peterson way." That was thoughtful. Kind of. I wondered, though, what he meant by the Peterson way. I assumed it had something to do with playing in his dungeon, or a business deal. Regardless, he was right. At the time I did feel uncomfortable kissing him, but after seeing Bethany and Carl having sex in the car, I wanted to know the feeling of Ellis' lips again. It was shameful to think that way, indeed, but after feeling such betrayal by the two people closest to me, my brain wasn't thinking rationally. All it was thinking about was the ecstasy that coursed through my tongue, my lips, and my blood, when Ellis' wet lips latched onto mine. The way he was so passionate in his kisses, like every movement in his lips had a purpose to make me feel special and loved. It was a feeling I never had when Carl kissed me, and, after yesterday, that all made sense. Maybe Carl never was truly into me. Maybe he was never passionate about our relationship outside of the monetary gain it allowed him to have access to. The idea that he and my sister had been seeing each other all along made my stomach knot. It was possible that they only started flirting after the breakup was official. But it was hard to know who and what to believe in anymore. End of messages. I had read through all of Ellis' last attempts to contact me, and now it was my turn to reach out to him. Should we make you a kitten? How about an angel? They had me sit and fawn over me. How about a white rabbit? The other one smirked. I feel like it's fitting for her. She'd make a cute and sexy little rope bunny. Insight into the criminal activity was what I needed him for now. Dwelling on what happened last night with Carl and Bethany felt redundant and traumatizing. I tried to gather up the courage to message Ellis for help, but after many attempts of typing words, only to delete them, I realized I wouldn't be able to get myself to do it. An irritated sigh passed my lips. I should be able to talk to him, but I felt embarrassed asking him for help on problems that he really had nothing to do with. My life wasn't his responsibility. He was my ex's dad, that was it. My mind was so overwhelmed that it felt like my thoughts were drifting away at sea. I just hoped that, wait. The Red Sea. Ellis was good friends with Jesse, and it was clear that he dined there often. Maybe I'd run into him there by chance and could speak to him in person. That would be much less awkward than having to beg for his help over a text message. I searched online for the address and directions on how to get to the restaurant. It wasn't too far away, but I decided it was best to get there earlier rather than later. Now, as I got out of bed and got ready for the day, all I had to do was hope that luck was on my side. Chapter 20. What do you desire, Olivia? Olivia POV. the hostess at the Red Sea sat me in a corner booth. I was grateful for the privacy since my cheeks were burning from what I was about to do. As the owner, Jesse was bound to be around somewhere. When I saw him, I waved him over. "Olivia, back so soon?" Jesse asked, arching a single eyebrow at me. "Your steak au poivre was just so delicious last time, I wanted to try it again." I gave him the most convincing smile I could. "And I wanted to tell you personally how much I enjoy the Red Sea, is that so?" he asked. I swallowed hard. He didn't sound convinced, but he nodded and gave me a warm smile. "You're always welcome here," Jesse assured. "Thank you," I said, nodding in return. "If there is anything I can do for you, personally, in regards to your meal, don't hesitate to ask," he assured me. His smile suggested a little more than what he offered, and I reached for my water, taking a quick sip to avoid answering. "I will," I mustered, my voice cracking even with the recent cool drink. Jesse gave an informal bow and headed back to the kitchens. I hoped he was off to give Ellis a call. That was the whole reason I came here, albeit the food was really good. I sipped my water and watched couples around me flirt, giggle, and enjoy their meals. I was so consumed with the tables around me until I heard someone sit down in front of me. I didn't know where I was, and I never thought my night would have ended like this. I swallowed hard and tried keeping my composure, flicking my hair and standing straight. I couldn't let them know that I was terrified. "Don't you think? I think it'd be a good choice." The man undid my hair and redid it in a high ponytail. "I think His Highness would approve." The man pulled a white lace one-piece lingerie set out from the rack and grabbed a bunny mask from the wall to hold out towards me. "What do you think?" I turned my attention across the table to find Ellis with a warm smile on his lips. I gasped and clutched my chest with my hand, feigning surprise, and putting on the best acting I could. What a coincidence. "What are you doing here?" He looked at me and chuckled dryly. "You're craving steak au poivre, I see." I looked down at the table. I hadn't even ordered yet. Jesse had to have called him and filled him in, which is exactly what I wanted. My cheeks were heated like a dry desert sand and I twisted my napkin around in my lap. It is delicious. I can't argue with that. Although, everything they make is just as amazing. Their dessert is to die for. Ellis raised his index finger as Jesse walked by. "Yes? Are you ready?" Jesse searched between us. "Yes, we'd like 2 steak au poivre and a bottle of," I interrupted Ellis, making him smirk with delight. "Rose for me, please, and Zinfandel for him." I flashed Ellis a smile like I knew what I was talking about. Jesse left us alone again and Ellis interlaced his fingers and focused on me. "Color me impressed. I know rose doesn't pair well with the dish we are having, but I think it's more to my liking." I swallowed hard and watched him sit back in the booth. "You tried it?" Ellis rubbed his chin in thought. "Let's just say I might have done some research." I blushed and peered down, tapping the side of my water glass. I was curious. Ellis relaxed and brought his own water glass up to his lips. "Your taste is most certainly refined, Miss Richardson." He raised one of his eyebrows at me like he approved of my life choices all of a sudden. I sat back as Jesse delivered the bottles of wine glasses, and steak. "Thank you, Jesse." It was as if Jesse had the steak au poivre cooking while Ellis was on his way here. "You're welcome, Olivia." Jesse nodded towards Ellis and they shared a look of mutual understanding before Jesse returned to the kitchen. "What was that about?" I asked, wondering if Ellis would tell me that Jesse had called him. "Business," Ellis said elusively. I wanted to ask more but he pressed on. "So, tell me why you really came all the way to the Red Sea?" He pried, dropping his napkin into his lap and cutting into his juicy, tender steak. "Is it that obvious?" I asked, staring at the red juices that poured from my steak as I cut into it. "I'm very good at reading people, or have you forgotten?" he asked, his voice dropping into a low, seductive tone. Lace is nice, but is there anything else?" I was trying to play the part, but my heart faltered when a corner of his lips curled up. "Sure." The man put the lace ensemble back before running his fingers along the tops of the clothing and pausing on a short dress made from white wet-looking material. I glanced up at him quickly. "No, I didn't forget that." "Okay, you're right. It isn't just the steak that brought me here. I'm interested in perusing the dessert menu too," I admitted, raising my chin resolutely. Now you're just being defiant," he remarked with a crooked smirk. The way he said defiant made my stomach drop. It was like he was challenging me to be more dominant, more resistant. I was surprised when my stomach fluttered delightedly at the idea. I quickly took a bite of steak in my mouth and watched Ellis's strong hands as he sliced off another piece and propped it into his mouth. I sighed. I couldn't exactly keep this act up, not when he was here like I wanted and time was limited. My sister. I'm not sure what to think about her interference with my life, I admitted. I took a sip of wine to cleanse my palate and poked at a potato on my plate with my fork. Ellis raised his eyebrows as he continued to politely dig into his meal. The sounds of his utensils tapping the plate kept me focused on him. You suspect she has been seeing my son for some time? He asked. I shook my head and then nodded quickly. Yes, but I got the feeling it was more than that. Like, maybe she was involved in my kidnapping or something. Who? Ellis hummed and took another sip from his wine glass as he listened to me rant. I want to know what her plans are, and if they involve me. Is that crazy? I peered down as I ran my steak along the sauce before taking a bite. I wouldn't call that crazy. You have every right to be upset. However, he set down his utensils to pick up his cloth napkin and wipe his lips. I do want to ask if you have any solid evidence to prove your theory? I set my utensils down and dabbed my mouth with my napkin before placing it back in my lap. No, I was hoping you did. He chuckled and poured me a glass of rose before serving himself one of Zinfandel. He seemed pleased that I was enjoying my wine selection. Ellis picked up his glass, cupping it and swirling it around before taking a slow sip from the edge. Ellis let his eyes linger up to mine, holding my gaze firmly as he set his glass down. I don't have physical proof. I have my word, but that can only get you so far. If you want more than my word, that will cost you. I am, after all, a businessman. I creased my brow as the corner of his mouth twitched up ever so slightly. What about something like this? Does this please the lady? I looked over the sweetheart neckline of the strapless dress and noticed how the skirt flared out. The man came over and passed me the dress, changed behind the screen. I couldn't tell if he was teasing me or not. Knowing him, if I really did want him to get involved, I'd have to offer something in return, something big. You'll get your payment. I feigned a smile, and he seemed pleased, not pressing the subject further. Now, is there anything you can give me? A starting point, some advice maybe? I asked, taking the lead. My voice sounded a little desperate, even to me. I lifted my glass of rose up to take a long sip from the edge. I've told you once before and I'll tell you again, Miss Richardson, if you want Bethany to reveal herself, you have to hit her weak spot. I nodded and thought about it for a moment. I knew that Bethany wanted Carl. I had no idea why she wanted my ex, but she did. But Carl still wanted me. At least he wanted my money and the title that came with my name. It wasn't exactly a love built upon what dreams were made of. I could drive a wedge between Bethany and Carl by asking him to meet up and talk. Make it seem like we are making up, I suggested. When I looked at Ellis, his face was a mask, the slightest frown on his lips. No, he rejected, simply, why not? I asked. I crossed my arms and leaned back in the booth. It was a good plan. If Bethany thought she was losing Carl to me, she'd make another move. It would throw her off balance, and she'd reveal herself. I don't like that plan, he admitted, again offering no detail. He gestured towards me with his half-empty wine glass. What about it bothers you? I raised my eyebrow at him in confusion. The part where you make up with my son. He downed the rest of the Zinfandel. My lips parted and I gasped. I wasn't actually going to make up with him, just make it seem like that's what was happening. He set his glass down and slowly let his gaze wander to my lips and back to my eyes, and the corner of his lips curled up, even in pretending. I don't want you getting close to him. But, why? I asked, shrugging helplessly. You're a very smart girl, Miss Richardson. You should know why I don't want you to go back to him, Ellis relayed smoothly. He stroked his chin as he relaxed against the booth. I watched his gaze smolder as his lashes lowered. I got lost in the way the light reflected in his dark eyes, making them ignite again. My heart began to thump louder in my ears, making my mouth run dry. The way he stared at me gave me the feeling that I somehow belonged to him and he wasn't going to let me be around men he didn't approve of. If I didn't get back with Carl and I chose Ellis, then Ellis would make a move. Don't keep His Highness waiting. The other man paused. Oh. Don't forget to put this underneath it too. He tossed me what looked like a bunch of thin leather straps and buckles in pastel pink. I didn't know what to do with it and he rolled his eyes and sighed. Unbuckle at these 2 points and fasten it around your thighs and hips. But if I chose Carl and not Ellis, then Bethany would make a move. I had 2 options on a single chessboard, and I chose to play dumb. I don't know, I admitted, coyly. Ellis sighed and poured himself another glass of red wine. What is it you desire more than anything in this life, Miss Richardson? Desire? I pondered aloud, my thighs clenching under the table. He could have asked what I wanted, but he used the word desire. Where was he taking this conversation? Yes, what is something you want for yourself, something you desire with all your heart? He elaborated. I chewed on my bottom lip and let it go to sigh. I really like this jewelry designed by a Parisian artist in Paris, France. It's very difficult to get your hands on. They sell for record prices at auctions and are one of a kind. I waved him away and rolled my eyes. I gave up on owning a piece years ago. What designer? Ellis brought his glass to his lips with interest. La Coccinelle d'Amour by Edouard Canet. My face felt hot as I admitted to him who my favorite custom designer was. Monsieur Canet makes the most stunning pieces of jewelry. I've heard of his work. Ellis smiled and took a sip of his wine. His pieces are truly exquisite. Yes, they are, I agreed. A moment of excitement gripped me as we found common ground. Ellis's eyes lit up as we spoke. Why was he so interested in what I wanted? Chapter 21. Help me, Ellis. The next night I was still puzzled over Ellis's interest in what I desired, while I got dressed for a charity gala. My family, along with some of the richest entrepreneurs in the world, had been invited. My parents always supported children's charities because they'd adopted Bethany, so these galas were commonplace for us. The gala was a black and white affair. Every guest was to wear some variation of the two colors. My black gown was floor length with a slit on one side that showed off my leg when I walked. I fiddled with the elaborate black diamond choker around my neck that my mother had insisted that I wear this evening. When we walked into the ballroom, everyone stared at me and Bethany at the top of a massive, marble, staircase. It was like the party had stopped and erupted into conversation about us. We walked down and I overheard the guests talking about how pretty we were. I could tell that Bethany was enjoying the attention, her face bright with a beaming smile. I waved to a few people and got radiant smiles back. At the bottom of the stairs, I caught one final whisper and quickly glanced at Bethany. Haven't you seen a thigh harness before? Sorry, it's been a while, I lied. What else was I going to do? I took the dress and mask from the other man's hands, slipping behind the screen to change into the skin-tight outfit. If I didn't do it myself, I was sure they would. Her smile gone, face pale. You'd never know Bethany isn't really a Richardson, someone had uttered. I looked around to see if I could find who said that, along with being rude. It was just plain mean. Yes, what Bethany did to me was heartbreaking. However, I still loved her. This type of slander was unacceptable. Don't listen to any of that, I stated firmly. I turned back to Bethany and touched her shoulder. You're my sister, got it? I looked for her affirmation. Maybe I wanted to see a look of guilt in her eyes over her sleeping with Carl. She didn't look guilty at all, even at the mention that I still loved her as my sister. A ghost of her smile returned. Yeah, thanks. Before I could say more, we were interrupted. Good evening, ladies. Carl walked up with his hands in the pockets of his black and white suit and my heart stopped. I should have known Carl and Ellis would have been invited. I glanced around quickly for Mr. Peterson Sr., but I didn't see him anywhere. Good evening, Carl, Bethany greeted with a warm smile. She took a step closer to him. Ellis wasn't here, so I knew this was my chance. If I was going to pull my sister's weakness, it was now or never, and Ellis would never have to know. You both look stunning, Carl announced, flashing a bright smile. You don't look half bad yourself, I replied, smiling lightly. My tone was even a little flirtatious. Carl blinked at me, looking a little taken aback at my friendliness. Beside him, I saw Bethany cross her arms and glare at me. She couldn't say anything though, or risk revealing that she'd slept with him. Thanks, can I get you fine ladies a beverage? He asked, holding his arms out like he wanted us each to grab a hold of one arm. I suppressed an eye roll. He wanted to have his cake and eat it too. He wanted me for my family's money, and Bethany for her stunning looks and confidence. Actually, Carl, I was hoping to have a minute with you, alone, I requested matter-of-factly. I flicked my eyes to Bethany, then back to Carl, and I raked my teeth over my bottom lip. Oh? Carl shifted on his feet. He looked at Bethany too. Why don't you just say what you have to right now? It isn't a secret, is it? As if I was the one keeping secrets, I could have laughed aloud. This was just too easy. No, I guess not, I affirmed, shrugging one shoulder. I started to play with the black diamond choker at my throat. Carl's eyes followed my fingers. It took me a moment to figure it all out before I walked over to sit down in the chair at the vanity. One of the men slipped the white latex bunny mask over my head, slipping my ponytail through the hole in the back of it. Well, I was thinking that maybe I'd acted hastily and we could. Give us another shot, I explained. Carl gawked at me for a moment. Really? He asked in disbelief. I nodded my head. Then, all of a sudden, a grin plastered across my facie and he grabbed my hands, forgetting all about Bethany. You have no idea how glad I am to hear that. I haven't been able to stop thinking about you since the moment you left me. I thought, surely, I had lost the love of my life. I giggled, but noticed Bethany wasn't. She was glaring at the back of Carl's head, so I ran my hands along Carl's shoulders to play it up more. Carl peered down at me with lowered lashes before whisking me off to the dance floor. Every spin had me seeing Bethany on the side, her eyes in thin slits and her arms crossed. If she was trying to hide her jealousy and disappointment, she was failing at it. When my father approached her, she feigned a smile and left the dance floor with him. It was a quick turnaround. What's wrong? Not enjoying our little dance? Carl held my hand and waist, waltzing with me. My eyes were focused on Bethany. No, I'm enjoying it very much. I gave him my full attention again. My plan so far was working out in my favor. After the dance, Carl and I sat at a table with a couple other people we knew. Bethany was carrying a tray around the ballroom with little cups of a steaming beverage. She was serving anyone who had wanted one. Here, you guys should try this, Bethany said excitedly, coming up to our table. She put a small cup in front of each of us. Carl had his arm around my waist, and I noticed how Bethany paused to glare at his arm before giving us each a cup. What is it? I asked. I lifted the cup and sniffed it. Tea. Mom got her hands on this rare loose-leaf tea from one of the other guests. She wanted me to serve it to everyone at the event, Bethany explained, a prideful smile on her lips. She was happy she was chosen for the job and not me, I thought. It smells amazing, Carl cheered. He took a dainty sip. I giggled and brought the teacup to my lips. It tasted delicious and warmed my throat and stomach, causing me to hum in bliss. There was nothing more comforting than a cup of hot tea to me. I continued to sip it and giggled with my friends, talking about various past galas that we had attended. I had almost finished my tea when I suddenly began to feel dizzy. The room felt like it was burning hot and like it was spinning around me. I looked in the mirror at how 2 holes framed my eyes and bunny ears bounced on the top of my head. The bottom edge of the mask ran over the bridge of my nose and down along my cheekbones, finishing touch from His Highness himself. It was like I was on a carousel at a carnival, watching the world spin around me as I sat in one spot. Olivia, darling, you don't look well. Are you all right? My mother reached over to place the back of her hand against my forehead. I don't know what's come over me. I feel dizzy. I touched my temple with my fingertips and massaged it in circles. Bethany, dear, do you mind seeing your sister home? My mother looked at my sister with a concerned expression. I wanted to tell her she didn't have to, but I didn't have the strength to refuse or argue. My head was spinning, and I was becoming increasingly dizzier. Certainly I don't mind, Mother. I will make sure she gets home safely. I heard Bethany's voice sounding overly chipper. While my eyes were in a fog, Bethany took my hand and led me towards the front doors of the gala, and my heart began to race as panic set in. What was happening to me? Was it the tea? No one else in the room seemed to have this reaction to the tea. I didn't want to go with my sister. I hadn't felt safe around her lately after the past few events unfolded the way that they had. Something inside of me told me to get away from her. I used the last of my strength to push Bethany off of me and stumbled away to look for help. Something was really wrong. I headed back inside. I searched around wildly, looking for anyone familiar in the sea of blurry faces. Then I saw the outline of someone familiar. Ellis. I hurried towards him, nearly falling over my own feet, and grabbed the lapel of his suit coat to catch myself. I peered up at him with a hopeless expression. Help, Miss Richardson? He asked, confused, steadying me with an arm around my back. My skin flared with heat and I practically panted at his touch. Olivia. Bethany approached out of breath like she had been running after me for days. Oh, Mr. Peterson, it's so nice that you were able to attend with your son this evening. Yes, Ellis kept his tone clipped, as he protectively held me up against his side. Sorry about my sister. She seems to have had a bit too much fun this evening. I'm going to take her home to rest. Bethany smiled and flaunted herself. You don't have to worry about her. She'll be all right in a few hours, I'm sure of it. I prayed that he would object to her taking me home, but his hold loosened on my side. He let my sister take my hand and she pulled me away brazenly. I peered back at him with a helpless expression, begging him to help me, to save me. He downed his drink, keeping his dark, narrowed gaze on me, before setting the empty glass on a tray and turning to leave. A play collar fit for a queen. My eyes widened as I watched one of the men bring over a black velvet box. He opened it in the view of the mirror, showing me what was inside. It was a choker made of massive emerald-cut diamonds. At least, I think he turned to leave. The entire room was tilting sideways again. No. I begged in my head, reaching out and grasping for him. Bethany tugged me harder, pulling me out of the venue and into the car. She shoved me into the back seat, muttering words I couldn't understand in my haze. What was in the TT? I gasped. I didn't even know if I spoke the words aloud. My skin was on fire, sweat pooling on me, and I felt like I needed to take my clothes off. Lights blurred in the distance. We must have been driving somewhere, but I couldn't tell if the car was moving or my head was spinning. I pulled up my dress, trying to get the fabric off my skin. It was too hot and too tight. I needed something to cool me off or break the tension, something to release. My thighs clenched together. What did you? I trailed off, too weak to keep talking. Just shut up. Bethany snapped. I collapsed into the car seat and managed to take the sleeves off my shoulders, pulling the dress down to my waist. I rolled both windows down, hoping the rush of air would cool me off. Instantly, my nipples hardened from the cool air. The rest of me just got hotter, straight down into my abdomen and between my legs. What was happening? Bethany pulled the car over. I tried to open the door. I pushed all my weight against it, but all that did was cause my head to spin and I collapsed along the length of the seat. Bethany's voice came to me through the window. Yeah, we're here. I lifted my head enough to see she was on the phone. If you wanted F***ck her, she's here. Just be quick, she snapped before hanging up. I was chilled to the bone. Fear coursed through my body and I looked towards Bethany's direction in absolute terror. What was she planning to do to me? I had to get out of here. I kicked the door, mindlessly hoping I could get it open. I scrambled and writhed around on the back seat, still panting and feeling so hot and tight. When I looked out the window, I saw someone standing there, peering inside. Ellis. I gasped. Chapter 22. I'll make you my good girl. Ellis opened the driver's door and I heard the locks click. He pulled open the back door and leaned in, offering me a hand. I bit my lower lip, heat coursing through me as the back of his hand brushed my exposed breast. Are you here to F***ck me for Bethany? I asked, smirking. My heart raced a mile a minute. I only partially registered that I was naked down to my waist and I had no idea where my sister had gone. They had to be 5 carats each. They placed it around my neck, and I touched it, wondering if Ellis had really given them it. I licked my lips and peered at the men in the mirror, since I'm to serve His Highness. He frowned. No, he assured. Come on, we're leaving, he said as he took my hand and helped me from the car. I stumbled from the car and clung to him. His citrus cologne overwhelmed me and made me run my fingers along his black button-down. Ellis' hand slid up my arms, sending shivers down into my aching thighs. It took me a moment to realize that he had put my dress back on. I ran my hand up to his neck where I let them linger up to his trimmed beard. I traced along his jawline, getting lost in how it felt against my skin. My body was on fire, pulsing with a delicious need for release. My fingers ran back down to play with his onyx-hued silk tie, undoing the knot with one tug. A giggle left my lips as I pulled his tie from his collar and placed it over my eyes, peering up at him. Blindfold me and make me beg, I teased. Ellis' fingers grazed my hands before he took his tie from me. He placed it around my neck and yanked me closer. Leaning down, he whispered against my ear, no. His breath was a hot caress down my neck and I practically moaned, let's go. He grabbed my wrist and dragged me away from the car. What about Bethany? I asked. I reached behind me like I could grab her, as if she was in the car with me. She left you here, alone and vulnerable, Ellis told me curtly. I dug my heels into the ground, forcing Ellis to stop and face me. So, we are all alone, out in the middle of nowhere? I was confused. I placed my hand on his chest, running my fingers down the buttons of his shirt, circling each one slowly as I licked my lips. I'm taking you somewhere safe, Ellis declared. His tone was rushed, unusual for him. He grabbed my wrist painfully tight and forced my hand away. I winced, but the pain sent flutters through my stomach. I bit my lower lip seductively. He released me and stepped back. I hummed, what? Oh right, I forgot. You don't want a foolish little girl like me. I put on a pouty face. That's not the case. Listen, Olivia, you're not acting like yourself and your sister is up to something. I'm taking you to my place. Ellis picked me up and threw me over his shoulder. No. I playfully hit his back and kicked my feet around. Ellis's hand came down on my butt with a sharp slap that stunned me to stillness. "It's my master in your case, little one," one of the men chimed in. "Right, my master." I cleared my throat and relaxed with my hands in my lap, keeping my poise. "In order to serve my master properly, I would like to know more about this establishment and what it offers to those who win a bid such as mine." "Behave," I gasped and giggled, shifting my hips against his shoulder. "I don't want to behave anymore. That's all I ever do. What if I want to be bad?" His deep laugh vibrated against my thighs before he placed me on the ground beside his car. I grabbed his lapels and yanked him towards me, causing him to pin me against the side of the vehicle. He caught his weight with his palms on the roof of his sleek, black, sports car and peered down at me with a growl. I ran my hands along his suit coat and down to his belt buckle. Suddenly, he grabbed my hands before I could touch it. He gathered my wrists into his hand and peered down at me. "Stop doing that," he snarled. "Why?" I asked, pouting. I wasn't as dizzy anymore, but I couldn't stop thinking about having his hands touch my burning skin until all the tension melted away. "You're making this harder," he whispered harshly. "What?" I asked, tilting my head to the side. "This or that?" I replied, pointing to the bulge under his zipper. Ellis groaned lightly and opened his car door. "Just get in, we're leaving." He sat me gently into the car. My cheeks flushed as I got settled and he got into the driver's seat. I rubbed my hands up and down my thighs, but it didn't satisfy the burning ache between my legs. I tried reaching over to grab Ellis' leg. He pushed my hand away quickly. "Be a good girl," Ellis commanded as he took off towards his place. "Humph." I crossed my arms and leaned back in the seat. Even when I tried to sit still, I couldn't. The pulsing lust pumping through me had me clenching my thighs and panting. Sweat was forming droplets all over my body. I felt steamy even with the air conditioning blowing strong. When we got to Ellis' penthouse, he tossed his keys to the valet and lifted me in his arms. No one would dare question Mr. Peterson what was going on as he carried me to the elevator. When the doors closed, I leaned in, nibbling on his ear. His arms tensed around me and he grunted. "I told you to behave," he reminded me. His tone was more gruff and more firm. "But you're so..." I tried to come up with a proper way to describe him, and finally settled on one: hot. "And I'm on fire." I groaned slightly as I nibbled on his neck. His arms tightened again, but he didn't say anything. Suddenly, bursting from the crowd of rambling numbers came a high bid in the form of a creepy-looking, overweight man in his 50s, wearing a suit that was ill-fit for his stature. 100,000. This is my first time here. The two of them seemed to silently talk amongst themselves with looks alone before one gave in. "Well, since you're here tonight, I'm sure you already know about our club." I had no idea about the club, but I needed to make them believe me, so I said, "Yes, but I just didn't expect it to be so upscale and unique." Ellis carried me through his penthouse and immediately to the bathroom. He deposited me on the floor and ran the water for a bath. I had hoped we were getting in together. "This isn't the Peterson mansion," I noticed. "No, it is one of my private residences," he explained. I pulled myself up on the sink, my legs a little shaky as I tried to stand on my own. Ellis whipped around and with quick hands, he removed my clothes. Every time his fingertips brushed my heated skin, I panted and moaned, shudders coursing through me. I needed him, I craved him. He lifted me again and lowered me into the tub. The cold water helped sober me up and cool the fire burning inside me. I latched onto Ellis' arms when he tried to let go of me. "Why don't you join me?" I asked with a sultry smile. He leaned in closer, his expression serious and unyielding. "That's not a good idea," he remarked. I creased my brow. "Don't you think I'm cute? Don't you want me?" I interrogated him. I was so ready for him. So why was he resisting? Ellis smirked and let go of my arms, standing straight. "If we have sex like this, you'll regret it. You'll regret me, and I don't want that." He left me alone in the bathtub. The cold water helped keep my head clear, and I knew now that I'd been drugged with some kind of ecstasy or aphrodisiac. Even with clearer thoughts, my body still ached with desire. Experimentally, I pinched my nipple lightly, sending jolts of pleasure through me. I moaned loudly, then clamped my hand over my mouth when the bathroom door opened again. Ellis strode in with a towel and a silk robe. He helped me dry off and get the robe on. I surprisingly wasn't uncomfortable with him seeing me naked. He led me out of the bathroom to his bedroom. I stopped dead in the doorway, seeing the walls were covered with sex toys. I hadn't noticed them on the way in. I couldn't even name half of them. All I recognized were the whips and handcuffs. I had no idea there was such a variety. I wondered, did every Peterson residence have a playroom like this? Ellis nudged me forward, not interested in explaining. I sat on the end of the bed as he pulled his phone out. I know it is late. Are you up for a house call? He asked into the phone. It sounded like he was calling a doctor. The guy seemed to be pleased with my compliment and he let out a proud laugh. Of course. We are the best dungeon known for our luxury playrooms and our world-class security features. We only serve the most distinguished guests. I jumped off the bed and grabbed the phone, ending the call. I tossed the phone across the floor. I don't want to see a doctor, I yelled. I looped my arms around Ellis' waist and hugged him. Right now, I feel really, really good and I don't want that to stop. I tilted my head up to look at Ellis. I blinked at him, my eyes wide, one side of his mouth arched up in a smirk. He brushed his thumb across my cheek. I thought I told you to be a good girl. Ellis paused and then continued. What am I going to do with you? He questioned. With a low voice he pondered. HM? I warn you, and warn you, I push you away, I try and tell you to behave, and yet you keep tempting me. When his thumb got close to my mouth, I parted my lips with a gasp. Ellis ran his thumb over my bottom lip and then slid his finger into my mouth. I closed my lips around his thumb and sucked gently. Ellis growled deep in his throat. He tried to pull his thumb away but I grabbed his wrist and slid his finger deeper into my mouth, rolling my tongue around the tip. I felt the firmness of his arousal press into my hip. You make it so hard. He let the word linger. For me to not worship you like the goddess you are. I let his thumb go with a wet pop. Then, don't resist. He growled and swept me up off my feet, before dropping me onto the bed. The silk robe slipped off my shoulders, the tie in front loosening and the edges slipping open. My breasts rose and fell in quick pants with my hands above my head and my thighs pressed together. Was he going to tie me up and have his way with me? Was he going to use one of those toys on me? I tilted my head back, looking at all the toys, and I gulped. Ellis wasn't like anyone I dated. He was experienced and I was not. My body writhed beneath him as he hovered over me and gripped my wrists in his hands. What are you going to do to me? I gasped out. As much as my body wanted him, my clearer head was suddenly nervous. Nothing, Ellis growled. He released me and covered my body with the robe, tying it tightly before getting off of me. You need to rest and sleep this off. What? I asked, sitting up abruptly. Ellis had his back to me. I pulled you out of one bad situation. My intention was not to bring you into another, he said in a clipped, formal tone. I rose up on my knees and placed a hand on Ellis's back. He stiffened but didn't move. Playroom? Let me tell you, one of the guys said. We have several playrooms that have various themes, from a Victorian-era theme to a more modern approach. Each room is fitted with all the gear that one could dream of. But I want this, I argued. You don't know what you want. You're under the influence of a powerful drug, he insisted. He shrugged my hand off of him. Humph. I flopped back down on the bed, my happy buzz dulling even more. My skin still felt hot and tight, like if I didn't get some kind of release, I'd explode. Finally, Ellis turned to me. Get under the covers, he ordered. I did as I was told. The warmth and weight of the thick blankets were comforting in my semi-hazy state. It made my body feel compressed and less scattered. Ellis came to the edge of the bed and rested a hand on my cheek. His touch was hot and I gasped. He smirked at me. That's my good girl, asterisk. When I woke up again, my head was hurting a bit, but my mind was clear. I stretched and rolled over, trying to figure out where I was when I collided with something warm and hard. It groaned. With a yelp, I sat up. My eyes got used to the darkness and I found Ellis sleeping in the bed next to me. The clock on the nightstand showed that it was almost 4 a.m. He grunted again and opened his eyes. How are you feeling? He asked groggily. Better, I said, nodding. He grinned and sat up. With a yawn, he stretched his arms. His bare chest rippled and bulged with muscle. My throat was dry and I licked my lips while my eyes glued to the way he moved. My stomach swooned. Catching my gaze, Ellis tilted his head and smirked at me. Do you like what you see? He asked, grinning dangerously. I shook my head immediately, but then under his gaze, I blushed and nodded in honesty. His smirk deepened and his eyes moved down from my face to my body. My stomach fluttered as his smoldering eyes raked over me. I looked down and realized my robe was slightly open, revealing the curves of my breasts. My cheeks burned and I tried to pull the robe closed, but Ellis grabbed my wrists. I gasped, watching as he tilted his head and examined my body. Did you take care of me all night? I asked. Ellis's eyes softened and he nodded. If I'd left you alone, you would have gotten yourself into trouble. Though, you tried your best to do that with me anyway, he teased. Flashes of sucking on Ellis's finger and trying to seduce him flickered in my mind. My stomach fluttered and my fists clenched. Then I said something beyond my own belief. I was terrified. Everything here was totally foreign to me. Ellis bought me. What would he do to me? I shook my head and tried to focus on the positive side. He was Carl's father, and based on the past few interactions, he didn't seem to be someone who would force anything on me, except for that kiss. Do you still want to get into trouble with me? I asked, raking my teeth over my bottom lip and looking over his bare chest. Ellis froze for a moment, and I finally realized what I had said. I felt blood rushing up my face and my neck. I must have been bright red. What did I do? Why in the world did I ask that? And most importantly, his reaction told me that he obviously didn't have any interest in me. Sorry, I meant. I was so embarrassed that all I wanted to do was to flee from this room. However, Ellis's strong grip didn't let me go. Then he narrowed his eyes and smirked dangerously. My heart started to race. Next moment I knew. I was pushed back on the bed. He hovered over me, still gripping my wrists. With a ragged breath, he growled, "I'll teach you all about trouble." The room where I met Ellis for the first time kept coming back to my mind. My mouth was dry. I was quite dehydrated, but the more information I could gather, the better. And which does my master prefer? I asked as I watched them stare at one another again, before answering me. His Highness is one who enjoys the classiest playroom here. Of course, he would only pay for the best room in the dungeon. I swallowed hard. I see. It seems that he frequents this dungeon often. He rarely visits in person, but most of the submissives who work here have played with him before. They say he is the most respectful, skillful, and caring dom here. One of them smiled. It was obvious that he thought I should feel lucky to serve such a man. It sounds like today is my lucky day. I don't even know how I got here, let alone being selected by such a great master. I murmured, but enough for him to hear, playing a game to see if one of them would divulge how I had ended up here tonight. He gave me a weird look. Indeed. You should thank your agent. Oh yeah? I chuckled, and looked towards him with a tell-me-about-it smile, and he clarified, your agent gave the mistress of the dungeon a large sum of money to get you in, you know. But it turns out, you're worth it, haha. My eyes widened. My agent. It must be the person who kidnapped and brought me there. Who would that be? I tried to keep my grace as my head spun with the information that I was given. This was unbelievable. Did my family upset someone enough to get them to sell my body as a service? Did I offend someone and not realize it? I rubbed my temples trying to think, but then my thoughts were interrupted. Anyway, welcome to the playground. We hope you enjoy recreating your deepest fantasies. I followed the two men out of a room and into a hallway. It was painted in dark reds with black accents. Chandeliers with LED flickering candles led the way down the long hallway with doors on both sides. I could tell that his lips were chapped from here, and he fondled a cigar in between his fingers, licking the end of it in a salacious way. A shiver ran through me at the sight of him flirting with me through his cigar and drink. They stopped at the end of a hall at a set of black double doors. His Highness has requested that you wait in the playroom for him. They opened the doors, and I was met with a wall of gears, ranging from canes to various restraints. There were also things on the walls that I had never seen before or even heard of. Royal purple, satin, bedding covered a massive bed with various hardware attached to it. A cage sat beneath the bed with fur-covered pillows and a plush blanket inside, making me wonder what it was used for. His Highness will be here shortly. He has requested you kneel on the pillow on the floor for him. Tonight, you are to be his little plaything. The door shut and I jumped slightly at the sound. I peered around the floor before I spotted the royal purple pillow on the floor. It looked soft, but I had no desire to kneel at all. I searched the room, trying to find a comfortable spot for me to sit down, when suddenly the door opened again, and I felt the room's atmosphere thicken with an intimidating energy. I swallowed hard and peered over my shoulder to find Ellis standing in the doorway with a dangerous smirk playing on his full lips. Chapter 16. Welcome to my playground. Ellis stepped into the room and shut the door behind himself. Something about the way he relaxed and strutted into the room like he owned the place made me feel calmer. At least he wasn't some stranger that I didn't know, but I was still nervous about whether he would really make me play with him. My heart began to race at the thought of what he had planned. Everything in this room was foreign to me as I looked around, making me feel a bit more unsettled. I watched him sit on the foot of the bed with his legs spread. He scanned my body up and down, taking in my lingerie, and chuckled, "What's so funny?" I uttered, not able to meet his eyes. Ellis didn't answer me. He slipped off his suit coat and neatly folded it, setting it on the bed beside him. I could feel that his eyes were locked on mine, burning into my soul and settling into the pit of my stomach. I swallowed hard, as he reached up to loosen his crimson silk tie with one hand. Although I'd seen him a few times before, every time I did, no matter for what reason and no matter how mad he made me, I still couldn't deny that he was a charming man. Mysterious, handsome, dangerous. He pulled the knot free and let it dangle around his collar with a smoldering gaze that seemed to linger on my skin. My heart began to speed up and I pressed my thighs together, as I watched him put on a show for me. The crowd went silent and only a cough was heard to break it for a second. 100? Anyone have a higher bid? The auctioneer peered around, waving his cane around, going, once. Going twice. The creepy older gentleman leaned over to chuckle to the person beside him, while keeping his gaze on me. The tip of his tongue licked his top lip before he raked his teeth along his bottom lip to bite it. A corner of his lips slowly curled up in a dangerous smirk. I stuttered. What are you doing? Just undressing, little bunny. Ellis kept his gaze on me and shrugged. No, that's not allowed. I made the excuse without thinking. My body was feeling increasingly uncomfortable with each layer that he removed. I'm not entitled to get comfortable after I paid so much money for you. Ellis furrowed his brow and tilted his head slightly. No, you can't just walk in and undress in here. I affirmed. I was merely removing a few layers because I felt too warm. Having you in here was making the room a little too hot. My cute little bun. He chuckled and undid his cufflinks to roll his sleeves to his elbows. That's better, please, no more. I called out. He peered down with his forearms rested on his thighs, softly laughed, and shook his head, before peering up at me through his skull mask. It seemed like he had no intention of stopping. His fingers reached up to undo 3 of the buttons at the top of his black button-down shirt, showcasing his collarbones and muscular pecs. I could feel my face become warm as I lost all of my words and became embarrassed by seeing so much of him. I remembered, he was a businessman. Maybe I could enter a negotiation with him again. How about another dance if you stop doing what you're doing? I offered, and I noticed Ellis relaxed back on his palms as he burst out laughing. How about we play? He smirked, his eyes taking in all of the toys on the wall at his disposal. My stomach twisted and I felt maybe now that Ellis was in his comfort zone, maybe he was getting a little too comfortable. Ellis suddenly stood up from the bed and closed the distance between us, the sound of his dress shoes echoing against the walls. Once the tips of his shoes entered my sightlines, he spoke up. I flashed a glance up at him with widened eyes. He pulled a pair of handcuffs out of his back pocket. I held my arms out thinking that's what he wanted. All of a sudden he released a few gravelly laughs as I remained kneeling on the ground with my arms extended. A sigh left his lips before he laughed again. I couldn't help it. I just love teasing you so much. The redness in my face was no longer from fear. It was a combination of anger and embarrassment. Ellis held his hand out for me. His eyes ran up and down my body and he licked his cigar with interest. There was only one solution that I could think of. I quickly looked around and threw my hand into the air, reaching up on my toes and shouting, I can pay twice the price. Here, stand up for me please. Don't worry, I won't force you to do anything you don't want to do. What? I stared at him confused by what he had said, reticently taking his hand. After I was on my 2 feet, he removed his mask, placed the handcuffs back in his pocket and ran a hand through his gelled back hair before walking over to a wardrobe to pull out the gown I had been wearing before I was taken to the dungeon. Here you are. Ellis handed me my clothes and walked away to a drink cart, flipping through a box of various teas. Get dressed, and once it quiets down outside, I'll take you back to your home. I nodded and hurried out of the gear I was wearing and put my gown back on while keeping my eye on him to make sure he wasn't peeking. I unfastened the collar from around my neck and set it nicely onto the bed. Ellis brought over a cup of hot matcha tea and gestured to a chair. Sit, please. I swallowed hard and sat down in the leather armchair, taking the warm tea from his hands. Thank you, master. He seemed to choke when I called him that and I blushed. He cleared his throat and kept his tone light. I think in these circumstances you can just call me Ellis. Thank you for the tea, Ellis. I warmly smiled and brought the steaming cup to my lips, letting the tea comfort me. I felt relieved with how the whole situation turned out, considering I could have been stuck with that other lunatic who wanted to buy me. However, I still felt nervous sitting here with Ellis. We were alone in a playroom full of toys, which seemed much less friendly than the name toy implied. Allowing myself to loosen up while I drank my tea, I reclined and immediately noticed that the whole ceiling was one large mirror. Observing myself and Ellis from this vantage point really alerted me to just how intimate of a situation this was. I brought my focus back down to my tea, but couldn't help stealing glances at all the exotic furniture. Ellis sat on a leather chair with a seat that was open in the front and seemed like there was a place for someone to lay beneath it. Ellis noticed my wandering eyes. He smirked. Queening chair, honey bunny. A what? My nerves shot up again as I heard him call it that. Ellis set his cup down and stood up, running his hands along the leather U-shaped seat. A submissive sits on the seat, and he then moved down on the floor with a groan, laid back, and slid his head beneath the seat in the open boxed area. They are worshipped from beneath. I blushed at the thought of two people doing that and hid my face in my cup of tea, hoping he didn't notice. He climbed back out and grabbed his cup of tea, sitting back on top of the queening chair with a sigh. The auctioneer paused, looking around the room as if a person for auction had never pulled this before. Maybe I was the first to have enough self-love to offer to pay for myself. The creepy gentleman in the crowd scoffed and shouted towards the stage, "She looks penniless. She's just bluffing." Everything he was telling me felt so taboo, yet he spoke about it with such openness. Just crossing the threshold into the dungeon felt like a whole new world, one that was too overwhelming to ponder. Luckily Ellis changed the subject to something more understandable in my lexicon. "This tea is delicious, don't you think?" He swirled his cup of tea around before taking another sip of it. "It's nice," I responded, but Ellis noticed my uncertainty. "You seem to have unanswered questions." Ellis remarked. It was true, I did, but they had nothing to do with this dungeon in specific. I needed to know who my agent was who got me kidnapped here in the first place. I rushed out the words, "How did I end up here?" I wasn't suspecting Ellis. It didn't make sense he would have me kidnapped just to spend $1 million on me not to do anything with me. I chewed on my bottom lip. Ellis hesitated and sighed. "Have you ever considered your sister, Bethany, might be behind it?" "There's no way." I denied it immediately. "Okay, ignore my warning once again, your choice," he declared in a way that made it seem like he knew more than he was letting on. I pulled the teacup up to my lips and took another nervous sip. "No, of course not," I thought. She wouldn't have had anything to do with this. Ellis let me enjoy my tea for a while before he stood up and held his hand out for mine. "I doubt anyone is here anymore. Ready to go home?" "Yes, please." I grabbed his extended hand and let him lead me out of the playroom. We stood in silence as we rode the elevator down to an underground parking garage where a matte black Ferrari was parked. He held the door open for me and I climbed in. Just as he was ready to take off, my stomach rumbled loud and I covered it with my arms, trying to hide the embarrassing sound that had erupted from it. "You know, in order to win you, I spent a lot of money." He peered over at me as put the car into drive and headed out of the garage. It seemed eerily quiet outside on the main strip, especially for Miami. "How do you want to pay me back? Or, should I tell your family that their daughter was being auctioned off as a submissive, nearly about to fall into the hands of some grimy lunatic, and let them reimburse me for my trouble?" I gritted my teeth at his questions. "My family could never find out about this. I'll work hard to pay you back," I assured him. $1 million wasn't a lot of money for my family. However, there would be no great explanation to having it transferred out of the account to a certain Ellis Peterson. He clicked his tongue against the roof of his mouth and winced in a teasing manner. "If you're thinking it's money that I want, you're wrong. Money is too banal, too boring." He hesitated and my heart stalled for a moment. "I'm willing to write this little mishap off under one condition. 300,000. A deep and alluring voice emanated from the back of the crowd. The crowd turned around and my eyes locked on a tall, broad-shouldered man, with dark hair and a crimson suit. His shadowed eyes pierced into my sapphire ones through a skull-themed mask. My pulse quickened and I could hear it drumming near my ears. He briefly broke his glance from the road and offered, "Let me take you out to dinner." My stomach growled again as if to answer for me, and I realized that Ellis was actually trying to take care of me. I was shocked to say the least that someone as overbearing and brutal as him could have such a considerate heart. Chapter 17, A Night Alone with Ellis. I looked over at Ellis, who was driving through the streets of Manhattan. Going out to dinner with him seemed a bit unusual, but I was starving. "Okay, I'll let you take me to dinner," I agreed with a flat tone and ever so slightly noticed the corner of his lips curl up as if he was pleased. "Great, I know the perfect place." My phone went off and I pulled it from my clutch to see my mother's name. They must have stayed up waiting for me to return home. I brought the phone to my ear. Hello, dear. Is the concert over? My mother's voice came through the phone laced with concern. It's a bit late. Your father and I were worried about you. I completely forgot my parents would have been worrying about me. I quickly scrambled for a reply. The concert was great. It was nice to have the night out. I knew lying to my parents was wrong. They'd be extremely disappointed if they ever found out. I chewed on my bottom lip and noticed a smirk coming from Ellis' lips. He was focused on the road ahead. Are you headed home? My mother seemed like her spirits had been lifted. I'm stopping to grab some food because I'm hungry, but then I'll be home, I assured my mother. I hung up the phone once my mother reluctantly let me go, and Ellis gripped the steering wheel with an amused expression. Thought you were a good girl, he smirked. I brushed my hair behind my ear and sighed. Not tonight. Oh, my type of woman, Ellis teased as he pulled up at a nice restaurant named Red Sea. At the sight of Ellis' black Ferrari, the valet ran up to Ellis' driver's side window. Welcome back, Mr. Peterson. I'll take care of it from here. Clearly, Ellis was a regular here. Ellis walked around the car to help me out of the car like a gentleman, taking my hand and placing my arm in the crook of his elbow. As soon as we walked into the restaurant, we were greeted by dark red walls and a massive aquarium in the middle with sea life and, most shockingly, a woman and a man outfitted as mere folk swimming around as entertainment for the elite clientele. One that ran along his cheeks and up to his forehead and was painted to look like an antique bone. He peered over at the man who had thought he had won me for the evening before he growled and let the atmosphere around him thicken. It's no use bidding. I'm winning this innocent bunny tonight. My mind was absolutely blown away by the place, and I was only pulled back to reality by an incoming voice. Mr. Peterson, welcome back. A woman at the front desk smiled and bowed slightly. It's a pleasure to be back, Judith, Ellis replied, nodding his head slightly. The man of the hour. A masculine voice called. I watched a short, but muscular, man with a shiny head approach Ellis. Hey, Jesse. Ellis smacked his hand against Jesse's and shook it. Jesse raised his eyebrows and smirked as he looked between us and the way my arm was wrapped around Ellis. And who's this pretty lady? Jesse extended his hand towards me. I shyly shook it and replied, just a friend. The friend doesn't have a name? Jesse raised his eyebrow at me. Olivia, I answered, feigning a smile. A beautiful name for a beautiful woman. It's a pleasure to have you here, miss. Jesse trailed off. Richardson, Ellis interjected. Jesse's eyes widened. You wouldn't happen to be the daughter of... Ellis spared me the conversation. Jesse, the girl is hungry. Never was a patient man. Jesse winked at me. Follow me. We followed him to the back of the restaurant and up some stairs to a luxurious night terrace. The lush green plants and beautiful flowers accenting a black iron railing around the roof was gorgeous. Not to mention the way warm fairy lights draped above us in vertical lines from a wooden structure. It was like a fairy tale. I brushed the skirt of my dress beneath me as I sat in the chair that Ellis pulled out for me. He pushed in my chair before excusing himself to visit the restroom to wash his hands. Jesse came over to me with 2 wine glasses and a bottle of red wine. He smiled friendly at me. Miss, I gotta say, Ellis' taste in women is as good as his taste in wine. I blushed and quickly explained, we're not together. Jesse popped the cork from the bottle of wine. I get it. He winked at me, but I had a feeling that he didn't really get it. As he was pouring the wine, he commented, Ellis is an exceptionally wealthy man, and I'm not just talking about his money. I looked at him, not sure where he was going with this. He set the second glass down in front of me. Don't be deceived by his cold and hard appearance. He actually is the most genuine guy you'll meet. Ellis came back to the table and adjusted his suit coat to sit down across from me. Jesse immediately asked, the usual? To which Ellis shook his head. Make something special for us tonight, chef's choice, Ellis requested. Certainly. Jesse nodded and walked off, leaving Ellis and I alone on the terrace.